So, I have always been puzzled as to why people put so much value on materials like gold, silver, and jewels. Yes, they're shiny and sparkly and they make pretty jewelry, but do they have intrinsic worth? Are they essential for our survival? So, I can think of materials that are more precious than gold or jewels. For example, water. So, water is life. If we don't have water to drink, we won't survive for more than about 3 days. And we also need water to clean our bodies and our homes and to irrigate our fields so that we have food to eat. So I think that if you were lost in the desert with a bag full of gold but no water to drink, you'd probably happily hand over that gold for a bottle of water. So, one of the unfortunate consequences of global warming is shortages of water, such as droughts and the drying up of rivers and lakes. And drought, in turn, is one of the factors that is responsible for the terrible fires that are now happening in some parts of the world, such as where we are, the western part of the United States, also Canada, and Greece and Turkey, Algeria, and also Siberia. Siberia doesn't get a whole lot of attention, probably because it's so far away and sparsely populated. But right now, the fires burning there are the biggest in the world. They cover 3.7 million acres. And so those fires are larger than all the other fires in the world combined. And another terrible effect of those fires is the melting of the permafrost under the ground. And that releases a huge amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which in turn will lead to more global warming. And water shortages also play a part in conflicts and wars between human beings, like the one that's been going on for 70 years between the Israelis and Palestinians. So part of that is about water. And also the ongoing war in Syria. So a 5-year drought starting in 2006 drove many farmers from the countryside to the cities where they lived in shanty towns and had trouble finding work and resources. And so that added to the already existing list of complaints against the government, which eventually led to a civil war. And we know all the terrible consequences of that war. It's still going on. Whole cities destroyed and millions of people either killed or displaced, trying to find refuge in other countries. So water was an issue there. And also several years after the Syrian war started, ISIS arose. And, they were trying to establish a caliphate in the Middle East. And one of their tactics was to take control of water sources like rivers and dams, because they knew that if they could control the water, they could control the people. And they were charging huge amounts of money to people just to get water, and then using that money to further their military campaign. So this has been termed hydroterrorism, and we could see more of this happening in the future. I've also heard about water mafia groups in certain countries like India and Pakistan that operate in cities where there's a shortage of water. So people are just so desperate to have water, they're willing to pay these mafia groups. And another really big problem related to water is the lack of clean drinking water. So there was an article about this recently in the BBC News, and it quoted a report from the World Health Organization, which said that more than 2 billion people, that's like more than a quarter of the human population on this planet, only have access to water that is contaminated with feces. Just one sip of such water puts them at risk of diseases such as cholera and typhoid. And it estimates that about 500,000 people die every year as a result of drinking contaminated water. So I was really affected by that when I read that. And gosh, I mean, it's having grown up in a household where we had plentiful water, you just turn the tap on and all the water you want is pouring out. And we had two beautiful rivers running through my town, and it just seemed like there was plenty of water. So it was quite eye-opening to start traveling and discover that people in other parts of the world don't have plentiful water and even clean drinking water. But fortunately, there are people and companies who are trying to solve this problem of drinking water. So one of the most ingenious solutions, I heard about this a few years ago when I was in Israel. There's a company in Israel called WaterGen, which has developed a technology that extracts water from the atmosphere, from the air. So apparently, the Earth's atmosphere contains 13 billion tons of fresh water. And I guess it works even in the desert, even in dry places. There's water in the air. So these machines can take water out of the air and turn it into drinking water. And they make different sizes of machines. Some are small and you can have them in your home or your office, but they have larger ones. And the largest ones can produce more than 1,500 gallons of water, clean drinking water per day. And these machines are already being used to support entire hospitals in the Gaza Strip and rural villages in Central Africa where people would otherwise have to walk for hours to find water. And another interesting solution to drinking water is transporting icebergs to places in need of water. So icebergs are dangerous because ships run into them and have big problems. And icebergs contain some of the purest water on Earth because they come from glaciers that formed thousands of years ago. And apparently one gigantic iceberg can provide water to 1 million people for 3 to 5 years. And this method is already being used in certain places on the eastern coast of Canada. And there's one entrepreneur in the Middle East who would like to, bring icebergs into his part of the world. But this process is kind of expensive and also tricky. And then there's desalination, taking water from the sea and removing the salt content. And this has been used already for quite a few years or maybe decades, especially in the Middle East. But it does have problems because it puts super salty water back into the sea, and that can wreak havoc on ecosystems. But now there are improved processes that do not have a harmful impact on the sea. So these are being introduced in certain places. So there is hope to this problem. So as Dharma practitioners, how can we relate to these kind of problems? Well, first we have to make sure we don't fall into depression and despair, because that doesn't help. And the situation isn't completely hopeless. There are solutions, and people are working to provide solutions. But we can also try to avoid being complacent and indifferent and, just take water for granted. I mean, it's so ordinary. It's so there, and it's easy to be complacent about it. I mean, that's not the case here in the Abbey because we rely on wells for our water, and there's a limited supply. So we're always very, very careful about our use of water. But it can happen in places where there's plentiful water and easy to just take it for granted. So it is good to keep in mind that there are many people and also other beings like animals who do suffer as a result of shortages of water, especially clean drinking water. So we can keep them in our prayers, and we can also support organizations that do help to provide clean drinking water to communities who are in need of that. And then, just be very careful about our own use of water. And like I say, even if you live in a place where there's plenty of pure water, Don't take it for granted because you just don't know what will happen in the future. Circumstances could change. You might find yourself in a different situation in the future. So it's good to learn to use water carefully and wisely. And then also there's karma, because the experiences we have in this life are the result of karmic actions we did in the past. And so from among the 10 non-virtuous actions, I found 4 that result in problems related to water. So one is killing, which one of the results of which is having unhealthy water, being in a place where the water is unhealthy. Another one is stealing. One of the results of that is being in a place where there are droughts. Another is idle talk. So that can result in wells going dry. We don't want that to happen. We have to be careful about our speech here. And wrong views. Wrong views can include things like refusing to accept important concepts that are important for our spiritual practice, such as karma and rebirth, the possibility of attaining liberation and enlightenment. So holding on to wrong views can result in springs going dry. So karmic actions that we do can bring about these kind of problems of shortages of water. So of course we should try to avoid all non-virtuous actions, all of the 10 non-virtuous actions as much as we can. But if we are experiencing water-related problems, then it might be a good idea to make special effort to avoid those actions that bring that result. Killing, stealing, idle talk, and wrong views. And when we do our practice of purification every day, we can bring to mind that we probably did those actions, even if we didn't do much this lifetime, but we may have done it in past lives. So think of that and purify that. And we can imagine other beings around us as well, purifying their karma from those kinds of actions. So there are things we can do within our practice of Dharma that could alleviate these problems. So may all human beings and all beings everywhere always have an abundance of pure and healthy and delicious water to fulfill their needs and bring them pleasure, enjoyment.